Thank you for joining the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I am very happy to host this talk by Karen Dittrich, who will be leading our live with the theme Born with a Disability Spiritual Aspects. Let's all give Karen a very warm welcome. And before she starts her presentation, allow me to introduce her. Karen lives in Berlin, Germany, and has been studying the Spiritist teachings in several study groups in Europe and Brazil. As part of her activities, she translates Spiritist books, texts, and talks from Portuguese into German. Please take this opportunity to send your questions during the presentation using the chat window. Karen has reserved time to address your comments and questions once she concludes her presentation. And now, Karen Dittrich.
Thank you, Bradley, and good morning to you. Good morning to all, or good afternoon, good evening to others that may be in a different time zone. So hello from Berlin. Actually, talking about Berlin, where I live now, we moved here last summer. And just before moving here in June 2023, we came here to prepare a bit for the removal, to prepare the apartment. And while we were preparing this, Berlin was preparing for the special Olympics World Games, which is the world's largest inclusive sports event, which was hosted in Berlin and in Germany for the first time last year. And that was an event where thousands of athletes with intellectual disabilities came together. And as I said on their website, they celebrated a colorful international festival of sports, which actually had the aim of being together and spending the special moment together, but also of achieving greater recognition and social participation of persons with especially intellectual disabilities in our society. And I think inclusion is an important goal in our society, no matter where we live, be it here in Europe, be it in the United States. And it's often brought in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And when we're talking about inclusion and accessibility, I believe that we would all agree that this is a very important topic, that this is something very important to work on. But then when we ask ourselves, how do we actually put it in practice? What am I contributing in my daily life to more inclusion in our society? I have the impression that there's still a few barriers that we need to overcome. So both physical barriers, but also some barriers that might still be there in our minds. And I believe one aspect that is very important to overcome those barriers of all kinds is creating mutual understanding for the situation of the other person and for their needs. So just to at some stage really reach that important goal of inclusion that we all would like to see put in practice, and to achieve a natural way of living together between all people, regardless of our respective characteristics. And I believe that the Spiritist teachings can support us in creating that understanding, or creating more understanding for each other. For example, when we look at the spiritual background that can lead to a person being born with a disability. So what may be the significance of that situation for this affected soul that is on their pathway of evolution? So that is what we would like to focus on today in our talk. And I'm also looking forward to exchanging with you on your experiences, and also what you might think about the topic. And one definition of inclusion that I found very helpful, I'd like to share that with you. Now I found my slides, is one given by a charity organization here in Germany called Aktion Mensch, Mensch meaning human being, who say that inclusion means that everyone belongs naturally. Or in other words, inclusion is when everyone may participate. And I like this definition of inclusion because it's, on one hand, it's a very simple one. And on the other hand, I find it very blunt, or in a way it shows us actually, if we say inclusion means that everyone belongs naturally, and this is something we work for. It means that at the state that we're in right now, we're not there yet, that everyone belongs naturally and that everyone may participate just in a natural way. So this is what we need to work for. And I know in other countries you have similar organizations, as Aktion mentioned. In the US, you have the American Association of People with Disabilities and other charities who do work to raise awareness for the topic of persons with disabilities, and also to make sure their rights are put into practice. And that's something that I'd like to mention briefly. It's not just a nice idea that of inclusion that we have, but it's actually everyone has the right to participate. It's a right. There's a legal framework for that as well. For example, there's a UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And in the US, for example, you do have a law since the year of 1990. I read a bit about it, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, who actually prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in everyday activities. And it guarantees that people with disabilities do have the same opportunities as everyone else to enjoy employment opportunities, purchase goods and services, participate in state and local government programs. So basically any aspect of daily life. Now, I'm not going to give you a talk on the legal framework in detail, but just wanted to bring that. It does exist, but to implement those rights and to give those opportunities, or to put this into something graspable, this is, of course, on the one hand, it's a task of public administration, and then also of the actors that are involved, that are mentioned in those acts and in those conventions, like employers, like public transport companies, any businesses that are open to the public, anyone who receive the public, and others. But then, on the other hand, that's nothing that you can just outsource, that anyone else who's not involved in those tasks can outsource and think it's none of my problems. But in my opinion, I think inclusion of persons with a disability is something that we all need to work on, and where every single one of us needs to contribute their share. And for that, we need, as I mentioned earlier, to create that mutual understanding for the other person's situation. I believe that in order to really put this into practice, we need to become aware, do I have any sort of barrier in my mind? Am I aware of the needs of a person with a disability, or is there something I could learn about that so that I can be of help or assistance in everyday life? And one aspect that I think we should also become aware of, that disability does not define a person. That is something that, for example, parents who have children with disabilities say, my child does have a disability, but this does not define my child. It's a child with such a rich personality with so many different aspects, and that disability is one of them. So look at the person from a broader perspective. And in order for that to be put in place, I think we need to work a bit, or many of us need to work on that in our minds and our way of thinking. And I think if we take on the spiritual perspective, that may help us to better understand this whole context. So why does someone incarnate with a disability, and what does this mean for the development of the affected soul, of the soul that is connected to this body? And in order to take this perspective on, I'd like to just mention a few of the basic principles of the Spiritist teachings. I just mentioned them briefly without going too much into detail, because I'm aware you have a lot of material on that on your YouTube channel of the United States Spiritist Federation, for example, where you can find a lot of talks and material about the basic principles of the Spiritist teachings in depth. So one of the main principles that the Spiritist teachings consist of is the existence of God, right? So God being presented to us as the supreme intelligence as the first cause of all things. So we find the attributes of God in a way that we at our stage of development can grasp more or less at the very beginning of the first questions of the Spirit's book. And so apart from learning that God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things, we become aware that God is eternal, immutable, God is one, God is all-powerful, God is supremely just and supremely good. And whenever we learn about God and talk about God, in the light of the Spiritist teachings, we become aware God is perfection, God is harmony, and God is love. Now, if the first cause of all things is an intelligence that is supreme, that's an intelligence we can't really grasp and understand, but it's characterized by perfection. It is all powerful. So meaning God could change anything, any situation at any moment. God is all powerful. God is infinitely just and infinitely good. So if that is the supreme intelligence that governs everything, then there must be a reason for the different conditions under which we are born and live. And to continue with some of the basic principles of the Spiritist teachings, we come then to the question, who are we actually? And we learn that we are an immortal soul, a soul that temporarily takes on a physical envelope when we live here in the material world, but in our essence, we are an immortal soul. And again, this is something that you find in all of the basic books of the Spiritist teachings in many details and under many aspects, and already in the introduction to the Spirit's book. We find this text that I like a lot because it reminds us that the spirit world is the normal, primitive, eternal, pre-existent, and all-surviving world. The corporeal world, where we are living right now, here on Earth, is secondary. It could cease to exist, or it might never have existed in the first place, without changing the essence of the spirit world. So that's our home, the spirit world. And spirits, we in our essence, temporarily take on a perishable material envelope, and its destruction by death returns them to freedom. So that's our temporary envelope, our physical body. And studying the Spiritist teachings, we learn that the components of us being here on the material level are the soul, our spirit. Then we have that physical body that Allan Kardec talks about, or the perishable material envelope. And then there's a third component, our spiritual body, or the perispirit, that connects the spirit with the body. And later on, I get back to this briefly. We also learn that our soul exists before we are being born, before we reincarnate, and that it will survive once we leave this material body, and that our soul retains its individuality. That's an important aspect as well. We learn that we progress as this individual soul. We are created unaware, ignorant, simple and ignorant, and then our aim is to reach perfection, to progress and reach perfection. And for that, we need to go through a number of material existences, as, for example, this sentence that I like a lot, which is attributed to Allan Kardec, who codified the Spiritist teachings. I think this illustrates it in a very concise way. To be born, to die, to be reborn yet again, and to unceasingly progress, that is the law. So this is the law that is the same for all of us, always with the aim of progressing. And the Spirit's book explains, on the one hand, the law of progress, and we also learn why on this pathway of progress we have to incarnate at all. Why is that necessary? We find this, for example, in the Spirit's book in question 132. that God imposes incarnation for the purpose of leading spirits to perfection. So this is the purpose of us being incarnate in this material body and of having this number of material existences. So we do have these successive incarnations in order to progress both on an intellectual level, but also morally. Whereas, for example, the Spirit of Emmanuel describes it as we create those two wings, one of wisdom and the other one of love, right, in order to elevate ourselves and to progress. I really like this image. But it's important that we learn under those two different aspects, both intellectually and morally, until we can reach perfection, which is our goal. And the principle of reincarnation is presented to us, or we understand when we study the Spiritist teachings, that this is a consequence of the law of progress, because we all have our free will, and we all study about it a lot, which means we can do as we please, but we will always be responsible for our actions. We will always face the consequences of what we do, because we're subject to the law of cause and effect. So what we're living now, our situation today, reflects our actions, our previous actions. Now, if we look back in history, we see that we are still far from perfection, and that our actions from the past were not only good. And so if we have to face the consequences of those actions, no wonder that we are facing difficulties under today's circumstances still, and that we're still going through some challenges. We are on our pathway of evolution. We have learned certain lessons already, but we know we also still made a lot of mistakes and still make them today. But that's something very consoling that the Spiritist philosophy offers us. For example, in the Spiritist book, question 171, we learned that God's justice leaves the door open to repentance. So yes, we make mistakes, but we're not condemned eternally for them. But God's justice leaves the door open to repentance. And in order to understand that mechanism of divine justice, according to the Spiritist teachings, we can study the book Heaven and Hell, one of the basic books of the Spiritist teachings that explain that to us. How does this divine justice actually work? And one thing we learn in that book, which I actually recommend to really understand that the progress, because on the first part we have all the information or the explanations of that divine justice, and then there's the second part where we have communications by spirits, souls who returned to the Spiritist world and who explain us why they were living under certain circumstances on Earth, or how they are doing right now, or at the moment that they were interviewed. And we hear testimonials from spirits under different circumstances, happy spirits, suffering spirits, and so on. And one thing we learned from the book Heaven and Hell is that there are 3 steps when we're talking about God leaves the door open to repentance, 3 steps for us to make up for a mistake we did, to make up for our wrongdoings. So the first step is repentance, so becoming aware that we did a mistake and repent. Then there's the second step, which is atonement or expiation. And the third step, reparation, making up for that mistake. And when we're talking about atonement or expiation in that context, it's important that we become aware that this is not a punishment from God. You made a mistake and I punish you for the sake of punishing you. That's not the case, but it is a learning process. We are here to progress. We need to remember that God is that all-loving, supreme intelligence. He won't just punish us because He would have pleasure. God would have a pleasure in punishing us, but really to educate us, to make sure we do learn that next time we act in a more positive way. So it's a learning process with the goal of evolution. And often this process is not completed in one incarnation. If we harmed someone, for example, very severely. So we do get an opportunity for atonement in one incarnation, but reparation perhaps could then follow in the future at some stage. And if you want to see some examples of that, I think the books by André Luiz of the series Life in the Spirit World has many examples for that. But I would like to come back to the perispirit, our spiritual body that I mentioned before, as one of the components of what we're having. We have the spirit, our soul. We have the perispirit that connects our soul to the material body while we are incarnate, and we have the material body. And the perispirit is a very important fluidic envelope of the spirit, because the spirit itself, once we are, for example, in the spirit world, it cannot have a direct effect on matter. So it needs an intermediary. And this is this fluidic envelope, which in a certain way belongs to the spirit and enables the spirit to influence solid matter. For example, in the Spirit's book, questions 27, questions 93, 94, we learn that the perispirit is the bond that connects the spirit with the substance of the body. And then, for example, that is also the agent of external sensations, to transmit external sensations to the spirit. So, for example, as we're in winter right now, the sensation of cold, this is through the perispirit that we feel that. And this fluidic envelope plays a very important role. That, for example, in the book Between Heaven and Earth, chapter 20, Between Heaven and Earth by the Spirit André Luiz, we learn from the instructor Clarencio that our perispirit is a vehicle of electric cells, which we can define as an electromagnetic field in which thought vibrates in a closed circuit. So it's an electromagnetic field, and thought vibrates in it in a closed circuit. So our thoughts have an influence on our perispirit. And once we discard it, once we leave our material body, we keep our perispirit when we discard it. It still accompanies the spirit. And the same spirit, André Luiz, in another book, Evolution in Two Worlds, explains it in a very beautiful way, because he refers to the perispirit, to our spiritual body, and says that on the journey towards the sublime goal, so towards spiritual perfection, the being weaves with the threads of experience the tunic of its manifestation, according to its spiritual form or its mental form. And our thoughts and our actions do have an effect on our perispirit. When we harm ourselves or when we harm someone else, we do harm our perispirit through that, and we injure our perispirit. There's a book by Dr. Marlene Norby called O Clamor da Vida. In English, I'm not sure that there's a translation of it, The Clamor of Life, where she explains us that, coming back to the question of disability and coming back to, or relating that to our perispirit, where she explains us that the disabled embryo is not the result of chance, but of injuries to the perispirit. By harming others or its own physical body, the spirit harms itself and needs new opportunities in earthly existence to return to normality or perfect health. So if we harm someone else or ourselves in one existence, and we keep that perispirit that we harmed, this perispirit needs to get a chance to heal. And when we're talking about harming our own physical body, so this is one particular circumstance that both Dr. Marlene Norby, but also others, for example, André Luiz in the books Between Heaven and Earth and Evolution in Two Worlds, refer to as the situation of suicide, if someone dies by suicide. In this situation, the spirit injures the perispirit, and depending on the type of injury and where the perispirit or the body the material body was injured, the perispirit takes this injury forward, and once the spirit gets a chance to reincarnate again, there is a big chance that there will be an impairment in that area where the perispirit was harmed. So, for example, if there was someone that harmed their skull or was harmed at their skull, this may have an effect on their brain once they reincarnate again, of some functions in the whole area of our head, be it the eyesight, be it the hearing, be it the ability to speak, or often it's also related to our brain function. So that may be an effect. But for us, it's important to know that if someone is born in a disabled body, the objective is to heal this injured perispirit. And then, for example, in the Spirit's book, question 372, we find some information on the purpose of the provision of impairments, where the higher order spirits explain to Allan Kardec that a spirit under that condition expiates a past wrong, and referring to intellectual impairments, the higher order spirits explain that a spirit in that situation really suffers from those constraints that it finds itself in, and from the fact that the spirit cannot express themselves as they would like to. But this is a necessary process in order to then get back on track, if you wish, so for that spirit to be able to progress again. So it's all based on the law of cause and effect. And the spirits will have a chance to make up for their mistakes later on. It's important to remember that this situation of being born with a disability is a temporary condition. So it's not just that the spirit would take this or would live with the disability all eternity, but it's for that one incarnation. But it's important to know that it's a necessity for that spirit. And as Dr. Marlene Nobbe says in that same book, all biological life is characterized by teleology, or the principle of purpose, oriented by a higher intelligent planning whose golden rule is love. And I think there are three aspects that we need to remember from that sentence. So there is a purpose for every life that exists. It is oriented by a higher intelligent planning, and that the golden rule or the base of all of that is love. And it's important that, so if we make a mistake, the divine mercy gives us a new chance. It's very consoling to know that, I think. On the other hand, it's important that a spirit in that situation really can seize this opportunity that is offered to them, that will be able to be born if you see that there is an embryo growing with a potential disability. It's important that the spirit actually gets this chance. And I know this can be a very difficult or painful incarnation for a spirit, but it's of great importance. And when we're talking about that moment of incarnation, of a new start for someone who will be born with a congenital disability, we also need to talk about the family that welcomes the spirit. Also the family that welcomes it, it's no coincidence, as the Spirit's teachings tell us. So either these are spirits who, out of love, accept to help the spirit who needs this new opportunity, but often we also see that the parents, for example, or other family members are actually co-responsible for the situation that spirit finds itself in. So in the past, they may have had their share for the situation or for the mistake that the spirit made, and now it's also their part to contribute and assist that spirit, giving it a new chance and helping it as the best as they can. Now we are all aware that once we are back here on Earth, we do forget our past, and we don't really remember why we are in a certain situation and what we did in the past. And there's a reason for that as well. Just remember, or just imagine we knew what we did in the past, it would be much more difficult. And it's not important that we know the details. So there's no need to speculate why someone is born under certain conditions or with certain limitations. What is important is to accept that the highest intelligence that we mentioned before has planned an incarnation for someone with the aim of helping the spirit, or with the aim of making the spirit progress. And the family and everyone else around are called to contribute with their share. But it's easy to say that in theory. I'm aware that this often can be very difficult for affected families. And for example, if we take parents who receive the news that their baby will be born with Down syndrome, it's just one example, which, well, I think that initially parents in that situation may be completely overwhelmed and will have a lot of questions, like, will I be able to cope with that situation? Will I be able to raise a child with Down syndrome? Perhaps that's the first time they come in contact with that situation in practice. And over the years, I had the opportunity to listen to and to read about a number of stories of families with children with disabilities, and especially with Down syndrome. And many of them said later on, if I had known then, when I got those news, if I had known then what I know now about this condition, that would have spared me a lot of worries at the time. But the problem was there was no information, or not enough information readily available or quickly available. And so I think that's something that we need to work on as a society, to make information on disabilities available or more accessible, to educate ourselves, as I mentioned before, to offer support to persons and families who have a child with a disability, and also to make those experiences of families who share their experience more accessible. So to take that worry a bit off someone's shoulder. And one important aspect is, I think that as a society, it's important that we raise awareness of persons with special needs, or regarding their situation, to break down not only the physical barriers, to not just put a ramp for someone who needs it, but to break down the barriers in our minds, and to make it much more normal for everyone to be able to participate, as it's the goal. Because then parents who are in that situation, who receive the news, your baby will not be that perfect one that you might have hoped for, to make it also easier for them to accept the situation and say, yes, okay, I'm aware we live in a society where I know I will get support, where I know there will be opportunities for my child as well, so I don't need to worry that much. That will be so much more difficult. Of course, it is always a challenge, but we need to work on making that challenge less huge, I'd say. And that's also based on something that the Spiritist teachings show us as one of the most important messages, the law of love. So that such a trial is a challenge for everyone who's affected from a disability or by a disability, but we are called to help each other to make this challenge easier as much as possible, I think. And we do see many examples of this in practice. I'm not talking today in order to say that we wouldn't care at all. We see many beautiful examples of families who give their best to assist a child on their pathway of caregivers, of volunteers, of associations in that field, and of everyone who is committed to help others and dedicates themselves to make society more inclusive. And I hope that the explanation that the Spiritist teachings offer us, based on the principle of reincarnation, contribute to our understanding in that field. And just to summarize quickly, I'd like to share this this text that I found in the Gospel according to Spiritism, that Spiritism shows us that life, or that this life, is nothing more than a link in the magnificently harmonious assembly that is God's work. It also shows us the solidarity that joins together all the different existences of one being, of all beings of the same world, and of all the beings of all the worlds. So that concept of solidarity, of something that is so much bigger than this one tiny link in this magnificent work of God, I think that's something that we, at least I personally, need to work on a lot to become more aware of that, and not just focus on that current life, but trying to see it from the spiritual perspective as just one of the many that we need to go through. So I believe that Spiritism really gives us a perspective, a very helpful perspective on life, on our own situation as immortal spirits, and also on the laws that govern life, the law of love, of the supreme intelligence that is in charge of everything. And now we talked a lot about disabilities as one of the trials that we go to, but we're aware that we all face trials which are the results of our past mistakes. So we're not here to judge anyone or what might have been the cause of your situation today, but we all have our cross to bear, right? We all go through certain types of trials. For some of us, this means being born with a disability, and for others, it means a different kind of challenge. Sometimes very painful circumstances that someone lives in, or painful experiences that someone needs to go through. Sometimes through some completely hidden suffering, but it doesn't worry. Everyone has their cross to bear, and we all, I think, are called to help each other as good as we can. And so I hope that those aspects can help us to develop an understanding for each other. So how can we make a particular challenge easier for someone? And that, in my view, plays an important role when we talk about inclusion as well. So that would be what I would like to share with you today. And I would also love to hear perhaps what you would like to add, or if you would like to share some experience. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your patience, for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Karen, for the wonderful insights, the information that you provided for everyone today. Please, everyone, stay with us for the Q&A session that will start shortly after a few announcements. We have a podcast-like series of Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life, based on the works by Joanna de Angelis. There's a new episode every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks offer a safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from a psychological lens, bringing insights, actionable tips, and real-world advice to help you lead a better life. Please subscribe to the USSF YouTube channel to receive notifications of new episodes. Also, the USSF has launched a new Spiritist app, Be My Hope, which is available now for download either on the App Store or Google Play. This brand new app offers uplifting content in a collection of videos, daily messages, and audio materials. Download it today. On the screen, please note there is a QR code. If you want to help the USSF produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, scan the QR code on screen for your donation. So let's now start addressing the comments or questions from the audience. There's still time to send yours in. From this Spiritist inspiration, in the return to the spirit world, can a person with a disability serve as an ambassador and mentor to those on Earth?
Oh, thank you. That's an interesting question. I wouldn't know why not. So if once we return to the spirit world, our conditions may be very different from those that we had on Earth. And also a spirit who in an earthly existence had an intellectual disability, was not able to express itself through its material body. Once returned to the spiritual world, that spirit may be as lucid as anyone else, and without the burden of that body with a disability, it would be able to express itself freely. And of course, I believe that spirit can serve as an ambassador and mentor to those on Earth in several ways. So through the way of intuition, for example, helping us to become a bit more aware, also inspiring those who work on that subject. And also, if you have the opportunity to really give through mediumistic means a message and explain that situation. And for example, the examples that I mentioned earlier in the book Heaven and Hell, there are a few spirits who had a disability. For example, a spirit who was blind, who communicates itself and gives the background of the situation. Why was he living under? Why was he becoming blind at a certain age, and so on? So, yes, summarizing, I'm convinced. Yes, spirits with disability can do that, and probably that's a big matter for them, or a matter of heart, in order to help us progress on this pathway here on Earth.
Okay, thank you very, very much for that. So, for let's see what else we have. From Fabio Nasri. Our son was diagnosed with dyslexia, learning disability, in his early years. Our knowledge and experience in Spiritism helped us a lot to overcome the difficult years of rehabilitation.
Thank you so much, Fabio. First of all, for
and also
you're still continuing. Yeah, sorry, I let you continue.
The spiritual help knowledge of the doctrine made us accept, understand, and this made it possible to overcome obstacles. Today, he graduates as a doctor despite dyslexia.
Thank you so much, Fabio, for sharing this example. And that was exactly what was like the driving force behind this talk, to share a bit. And I only touched upon a few aspects, right, of the Spiritist teachings. It's so complex, but I'm aware you've been studying that for a long, long time. So that can really help us coping with the situation, understanding much better. And I'm happy you shared that example. Thank you so much. I'm sure it can inspire others and encourage others and other families.
Yeah. Thank you, Fabio, and thank you, Karen. From the U.S. Spiritist Federation. Is it wrong for us to ask to be born with a condition in order to learn and improve our understanding and compassion?
Is it wrong? I think anything that makes us learn, that helps us to understand, I don't think, who am I to say it's right or wrong? When we ask for an incarnation, or to incarnate under a certain condition, and putting ourselves back now in the situation, back in the spiritual world, between the material incarnations, what the Spiritist philosophy teaches us is that we do have a much broader perspective. We see the bigger picture. So what is our position right now? What were the several incarnations I had before? What do I need to learn? And then I may ask my mentors, spirits who are more evolved than I am, what they would recommend me to which conditions they could recommend me, or maybe I have some ideas, and this could be one, if that's something that I think could help me understand, to be more passionate, and to be to be more inclusive. I think that's a very valid motive, and in the end, we will incarnate in one way or another only if God allows that for us to happen, right? So I don't think we will need to we should worry if that's right, if it's wrong, but everything that is motivated by love, by the driving force to progress, to learn in a positive way, to improve our understanding and compassion. I think that's a very valid motive.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So for the next one from Joaquin, since we are very far from perfect, spiritually and morally, aren't we all in some sense disabled?
Thank you, Joaquin, for your question. Yes, indeed, we are in our stage of development. We are far from being perfect. In the sense disabled, I'd like to understand a bit better what you mean by it. Every one of us still faces the consequences of our past actions in the way of the negative actions that we did. Otherwise, if they were all positive, we wouldn't be here right now incarnate, but we would be somewhere else already living a much lighter life, I think. I'm not sure we could say disabled, but we all face we face several challenges, be it a certain kind of what's the term? I'm missing it. Of suffering from a certain illness at some stage of some kind of condition that may or not be part of the definition of this being disabled. So disability has several several definitions, and for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act has a very broad one. So depending on what it is, but I guess we all suffer from some kind of challenges, which are the results of our past actions. So be it someone who's suffering from a migraine, or be it someone who's having a heart condition at some stage in life, perhaps not born with it, but acquiring it because of some action in the past. You could consider it under that aspect if you wish.
Okay, thank you. So we have next comment from Spiritual Med. Dyslexia is the brain working differently and also brings valuable gifts. Visual thinkers, not siloed thinking, but more holistic, the big picture thinking, which we need much more of. And Fabio indicates that child had a very difficult time at school, and so this created challenges for learning. From the United States Spiritist Federation, Spiritism helped our understanding a child with dyslexia. It is the brain working differently and brings that valuable gift of holistic thinking.
And isn't that a great aspect, that if you're talking about someone thinking in a different way, or someone living life in a different way than what we consider normal or standard, that actually broadens our horizon, right? Also, that's something that I heard from people who work with children with disabilities, that they learn so much from those children because they live life, I don't know, worrying perhaps less than others do, or just showing some completely different aspect. So it's so enriching. There's also some families who have children, for example, with Down syndrome, say that how enriching it is to that family. So it brings us new aspects that we wouldn't have thought about before, right? I think that's something very beautiful to see, that enriching aspect, and not only focusing on someone's disability, but actually on their abilities, on all the positive aspects that person brings as well. And I'm very grateful for you sharing your experiences. That's very helpful.
Well, thank you very, very much, Karen, and for your insights and for the wonderful presentation. And many thanks to everyone who has watched today's Talk Live and those who have been following our weekly Spiritist Talk series. Don't mix our next Saturday, January 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, when Claudio Filio will be speaking about no judging. Karen, before we close the live, would you please offer up a prayer?
Sure. Dear God, thank you so much for the opportunity of coming together today and exchanging on the many aspects that the Spiritist teachings can bring us, how they can help us to understand life from a different angle. Thank you for the opportunity of studying the Spiritist teachings and of being able to exchange with our friends, our brothers and sisters around the world on those topics. Today, I'd like to ask for your blessings, especially for all of those among us who live with a disability, who have family members, friends, colleagues with a disability. I'd like to ask for your light for all of us, so we may increase the understanding for each other, trying to understand where we can be of help, where we can make someone else's trials a little lighter and contribute to a more inclusive world where we don't need to focus on something that we see as a limitation, but where we can focus on the human beings, on the souls, the immortal souls that we all are. And at this very special moment that we're going through on Earth, I would also take this opportunity and ask for your help, praying for peace here on Earth, helping us to find the means to live together in a peaceful way. So be it.
Thank you. May all of you have a calming and mindful weekend.